So now we know.
You can turn the volume down on the computer a little bit.
Yeah. So should I just get started? Okay, so
you want to admit?
Oh yeah, some more people. Hello everyone, welcome. Thanks for joining the October meeting of the Brooklyn Solid Waste Advisory Board. We're very excited to welcome our guests, but before that, we just want to quickly take care of some business if we can, but if we don't have a quorum, maybe we should just wait until after she's spoken. Let's wait, because we have a very dignified guest, and we're all very excited to hear her. Oh yeah, we'll introduce ourselves first around the room. People are putting in the chat. So would you like to go first, Pablo?
Yeah, Pablo Garcia. I'm a Brooklyn SWAB member, and I'm on the Organic and Legislative Committee.
Okay. I am Rhonda Kaiser. I am the chair of the Brooklyn SWAB, and I'm on just about all the committees.
I'm Sherry Rickle. I am a SWAB member, current Outreach Committee Chair, and Associate Coalition Liaison.
My name is Frederick Phillips, and I come to this meeting because it's the closest thing to a monthly climate activists meeting.
Nice.
Good stuff. Mary Ellen Sullivan, Secretary of the SWAB, part of the Outreach Committee.
Lacey Tauber, Legislative Director for Brooklyn Borough President Reynoso.
Going to check on
Hi, I'm Beth Slepian. I'm Vice Chair of the SWAB and on the Outreach Committee.
I'm Nora McCauley, and I'm just interested in solid waste.
Great. Thank you all for coming, and thanks everybody for joining us virtually. So let's just get started and introduce our guest. We have Samantha McBride, who worked for 25 years of civil service as an analyst and manager with DSNY and then DEP, Bureau of Wastewater Treatment. She currently teaches an urban environmentalism program evaluation and public management at Baruch College's Marx School of Public and International Affairs. She's an advisor to Earth Matter, and she collaborates with Hunter College, CCNY, Pratt Pace, NYU, and schools outside of NYC on a range of research and student mentoring projects, all from a discard studies orientation. I like that. That's a great phrase. So thank you very much for joining us, and please continue.
Well, thank you, Rhonda. I don't know that we've ever formally met. I'm sure we've seen each other. So it's very nice to meet you and the other members of the Brooklyn SWAB. So I will just go ahead and share my PowerPoint here. Okay. So can you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay. So I am going to be talking mainly about Brooklyn tonight, though be glad to discuss Queens and other boroughs. I'm going to be presenting the results of a performance evaluation that I did on the curbside organics collection program in Brooklyn, and also talking about the importance of data openness, transparency, and analytics. So just briefly about myself, as mentioned, I worked for 25 years in civil service. My last job was at the Bureau of Wastewater Treatment in process engineering, R&D. I'm happy to talk at the end if people want to discuss. I understand people want to discuss that side of it. And I have kind of a nuanced view. I'm neither, 100 pro or 100 against co-digestion of food scraps. It really depends on how it's done, and I'd be glad to discuss that. Um, I I also want to point out that I recently I've been very involved in the fight against the displacement of the community compost sites and the prior fight to refund the compost project. I consider myself more soil focused than atmospheric carbon focused from a policy perspective and political perspective. And maybe we can talk about that as well. Both are important, but I am more soil focused. Um, I don't have any conflicts of interest here. Nothing is motivating me for doing this work except my feeling that the public has a right to know public information, and that we need to have a fair and accurate public discourse about all types of waste policy in New York City. Um, I do not have any inside track into DSNY. I'm not in contact with anyone at DSNY that is in any position of any authority whatsoever, or at DEP. I did not, as I'll explain, all of the data that I present to you at all times is from public data sources. So I'm not working with any inside track data. And my goals, aside from, transparent data and reporting, include very generally return of organics to soil, looking at the connection to organics and jobs, in an economy that is without a doubt going to continue to change radically over their term as we start to grapple more severely with the impacts of climate change and the political upheavals that are coming along with it. So I'm also very concerned about resiliency and future threats. Okay. With that said, it is, very undisputed that sending organic materials to landfills is a driving source, although not the leading source in the state or the country, because that is still coming from power production. But still a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions, especially in the area of methane. And this is being driven by the large scale export of over 1 million tons a year of residential organics from the city, as well as roughly equal amounts, although our data is not that great, on commercial waste, as well as to some degree the export of treated sewage sludge to landfills as well. So it's a leading contributor to climate change, and this is very important, if only for the fact that there's a legitimacy in talking about organic waste diversion that is very immediate in the context of the CLCPA and other kinds of climate legislation, and that's always important to remember. So from the excellent work of Claire Mifflin and colleagues at the Center for Zero Waste Design, we're starting to have an understanding of the ability of the city to absorb compost that would be produced if we started to near a capture rate, that was capturing a significant amount of the potential organics that could be composted. So that work has been done. But we are now in the midst of a returned curbside organics program that that has a history, and I want to emphasize that. I want to emphasize that to people in the city council. I want to emphasize that to policymakers. And the history is not one of success, but it's important to look at that history for understanding what is going on now. So you all might remember this map from, probably this map was made in 2016, 2017. The city was expanding curbside organics collection to buildings of 1 to 9 units in selected districts of the city in kind of a patchwork fashion. It was a very confusing rollout. And I can tell you all internally, my colleagues were not happy about it either. Proceeding that way, it made it very difficult for us, and we knew that it was confusing. But that was the way that the program rolled out in the past until it reached 35 districts out of the 59 districts. There were also multiple food scrap drop-off sites, which are shown by the green dots. But also there was the aspect of the program that was aimed at 10 plus unit buildings, which needed to enroll. And in Manhattan and Southern Bronx, there were special routes that were designed to cross borough boundaries and pick up from those enrolled buildings. There were not a lot of enrolled buildings. I should have had this in front of me, but I think the last count was under 1,000 buildings, right? So there are hundreds of thousands of buildings in New York City. But this was a different approach for 10 plus unit buildings, which may become relevant as we continue to talk about some of my findings. So one of the things that I did with the past organics program was not actually frontline, going out and interacting with residents. That was done by other folks. I was behind the scenes in operations and basically the distribution operations for these hundreds of thousands of plastic bins that we had manufactured in Canada out of HDPE and sent down here. And those were, as I say, distributed in the hundreds of thousands. We kept extremely good records on who got a bin. And there were also millions of kitchen containers, millions of plastic kitchen containers that were distributed along with these brown bins. There was also community engagement, and it was multilingual. It was integrated with many different institutions in communities, many groups, not just the New York City Compost Project. But what I will say, now that I don't work for sanitation, is that the number of staff and the budgets that have been devoted to community engagement, outreach, and education at sanitation have never been anywhere near to being enough, right? That it's just that simple. There's more to it than that. But when you talk about having a city of close to 9 million human beings, right? You need to multiply your outreach force tenfold, 20-fold beyond what it is, simply by the number of people that you have to reach. And that has never been done, and I'm not sure that it ever will be done at sanitation. So I am driven to calculate what's known as a capture rate, which I call a natural bullshit detector. And I'll explain why. It's hard to wiggle around a capture rate. It's hard to spin things. It's hard to engage in rhetorical, um, um, political discourse with the capture rate. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm such a fan of this particular metric. So I will get to the results in detail a little bit later. You've probably already seen that the capture rate that I calculated for Borough of Brooklyn in FY24 was 3.6%. And what this means is that the remainder was organics, compostable organics that were put in the trash. I emphasize this second part because people that are not that versed in waste statistics sometimes think when they hear that hundreds of thousands or millions of tons of compostable organics were thrown out, they think that sanitation is throwing it out after it's collected as separate organics, and that's not what I'm talking about here. I am talking about the result of whether or not compostable organics were separated properly, put in a brown bin or other labeled bin on the collection day, and collected by sanitation, which would take this either to a transfer station and then onto an anaerobic digester or to the Staten Island compost facility, or whether the compostable organics were not separated and instead were collected with other materials and refuse, also moved through transfer stations and went to landfills outside of New York City, as well as waste energy combustion outside of New York City. And at play, what we have is about 300,000 tons of potentially compostable material that is generated every year just from the borough of Brooklyn. So you all may be familiar with the diversion rate. I'm sure you've heard about the diversion rate before. If you think of each one of these symbols representing tonnages of different materials. So for example, you could put you may have tonnages of MGP recycling, paper recycling, of course, organics, maybe e-waste, maybe textiles. If you put the total tonnages of materials that were sent to some kind of beneficial use in the numerator, and you put that same tonnage in the denominator plus the tonnage of trash, what you get is the diversion rate. So an important thing to keep in mind is that the diversion rate does not require the waste characterization study. It can be calculated at the drop of a hat based on collection tonnages. Now, collection tonnages are posted in DSNY monthly data on open data, and the vast majority of the data that I will use in this presentation comes from that source. Additional data on things other than trash and organics and recycling is posted in this separate report, which has not as of yet been updated for FY24. And that is going to become relevant a little bit later in our conversation. So that's the diversion rate, and you all, I'm sure, have heard about the diversion rate for many years. The capture rate is not a substitute for the diversion rate. It's just another way of looking at information on performance. And the first thing to keep in mind about it, it's materially specific. So it's going to be looking at materials or sets of materials rather than tonnages as a whole. And already when it does that, it becomes less liable to get exaggerated because with the diversion rate, if you decide, you know what, I'm going to put in construction, demolition, debris, rock crushing, because that's a form of reuse in the numerator and the denominator, your diversion rate's going to go way up. But people are not going to necessarily know that or see that. And that I wrote about that phenomenon happening with San Francisco many, many years ago. I wrote an article about that. But also important to some things I'm going to talk about now is that attempt has been made in kind of long ago history within New York City by sanitation that also wanted to include rock crushing at Fresh Kills and other very heavy forms of reuse of inert material in the diversion rate calculation and the diversion ton calculation. And NRDC brought a lawsuit against sanitation prohibiting them from doing that. And that was sometime in the 1990s, I believe. So back to the capture rate, you don't, with the capture rate, you don't need to worry about those kind of shenanigans necessarily, because you're looking only at one material or set of materials at a time. So this does involve looking at tonnage, and the tonnage is the tonnage of, in this case, the separated organics. And you're also looking at trash tonnage that is generated at in the same time periods and by the same geographies as those who generate the organics, like a district, fiscal year, or by month, all that. But for capture rate, you also need waste composition. And that is only going to be able to come from a waste composition study. That's not something that's continuously measured like tonnage. It's something that's periodically measured through waste composition studies. And as you all know, probably the most recent one just came out in just earlier this year. So what you do for a capture rate is that you multiply the percentage of the material that you're seeking to divert. So in this case, compostable organics, by the tonnage of trash in the same time period and geography, and you get an estimate of the tons of organics that are going out in the trash. So you put in the numerator is the tonnage of collected organics, and then in the denominator you have the sum of those two measurements, which essentially add up to everything that could be potentially composted in the denominator. That's the capture rate. In the 2023 waste characterization study, they estimated that 42.5% of residential refuse was compostable organics. And by that, I mean food scraps, yard trimmings, and compostable paper and packaging. They also presented these estimates for 9 different housing density and income strata that correspond to all the districts in New York City. They did not directly calculate a borough-based percentage, but I did that from the strata results applied to the districts within each borough. And what you see is something that shouldn't really look really wrong to you, right? You see a little bit more compostable organics in Staten Island. You see the least in Manhattan. And a major reason for that is going to be yard waste. So here are the results from the 2023 waste characterization study. On the left, what we're looking at is trash, the composition of trash. 57.5% of it is considered non-compostable. Now, some of that does consist of materials that are classified using the sanitation waste characterization classification system as organic, like textiles or rubber, natural rubber, or hygiene products, which would be your diapers, your sanitary napkins, animal mortalities, things like that. Some of those are actually combinations of synthetic and biogenic wastes. They're not even purely organic, but they're classed that way. That's not what we're looking at in this analysis at all. In this analysis, I'm going by the definition of compostable organics as being categories that I just mentioned. And we can see that out of the 42.5%, most is food scraps, followed by compostable paper and packaging. And on a citywide level, relatively little of it is yard trimmings. Now, if we look at the characterization that sanitation did on separated organics that were collected, we see that the vast majority is actually yard trimmings with much, proportionately much less food scraps and almost no compostable paper and packaging, and that gray other part is low contamination. What I will say is that the waste characterization study was good. but in not presenting borough level results or even strata specific level results for separated organics, like they did with refuse, there's not a lot more that I can do with the data. Obviously, a citywide average that of collected organics is really going to be looking mainly at Brooklyn and Queens, but we don't really know the degree to which each contributed to this overall composition. And it's kind of it's not optimal that more of a level of resolution for the organics composition wasn't presented in the waste characterization study. We can talk about that as well if you'd like. Okay, so here we get to the results. So using this method, using open data monthly tonnages, and using an estimate that for each borough of compostable organics in refuse. And I was not, I will say that I did not go back and redo the estimates in 2017 or 2014 to correspond with prior waste characterization studies, mainly because one thing that I'll tell you that I've noticed about waste characterization studies in New York City since I've been doing them since 2005 is that they change very slowly, right? They are generally consistent overall. They don't contain a lot of surprises, although they may contain a few. And in the area of organics, not the results from compared to past studies are not hugely different. They are a little different. So if a person wanted to get even more precise about these capture rates, they could go back and do that research. But overall, what we see, first of all, is the progression of the program. So you see that we have, for example, Brooklyn 6 and 7 began and 10 began the program in FY 2014. And we also see that other Brooklyn districts joined the past program in 2018, a lot closer to the time it was cut. And some were not in the prior program. So we see that. We also see after the hiatus of 2021, the capture rates by fiscal year for under the new program. So let me also reiterate that in the past, the program was automatic for only 1 to 9 unit households. In Brooklyn, if a 10+ building wanted to enroll, they'd have to go through the enrollment process and then they'd be added to an existing curbside route. I do not have the number of Brooklyn buildings that enrolled, but it was not high, right? This is really not part of this analysis. But after 2021, all buildings are supposed to be automatically enrolled. So before we have 1 to 9 unit buildings automatically enrolled, after we have all buildings automatically enrolled. As you'll see, the tonnages change, the per capita tonnages or per household tonnages change, and the capture rates change from the old program to the new program. But one of the great things about a capture rate is that because it's a rate, it's going to take into account the different numbers of households served before and after, for example. So we see overall that we are achieving, and there are some happy exceptions to this. For example, BK2, or well, no, that I was trying to find one that is hitting a record in post 2021. There are a couple of them. But overall, what we see is that by and large, in the past, districts that had the curbside organics program had higher capture rates than they're achieving now. So that's one big observation. Another observation is that that they had they got started, they went up, and then in many cases, they started to go back down even before the program was cut. Now, I can only speculate about that, and we can discuss that as well, but that is a trend that we see. Furthermore, we see overall, we do not have double-digit capture rates by and large. We have BK6 being the leader and reaching double digits from time to time. But these are low capture rates. If you want a comparison, think of the recycling capture rate for paper, dual stream paper, metal, glass, and plastic. That's in the high 40%. And unlike some of the history that may be being discussed in the public sphere, curbside recycling did not start out at rates like this and slowly climb year after year. As soon as it was citywide, it hit a capture rate that was probably, I would guess, like probably in the high 30s or so. And then it increased a little bit over time, mainly because additional materials were added to curbside recycling. Any city that is consistently achieving these capture rates over time would consider them low, and they have serious implications for the long-term viability of the curbside program because in essence, it means that we are sending out sanitation trucks, whether single or dual bin, to collect very little of the potential material that's out there. And that wastes labor costs, that wastes fuel costs, that wastes equipment cost, and it also generates truck emissions that aren't recouped down the line. Now, if we just look at performance 2020, FY22, sorry, and on, we see some ups and downs. Often in the fall, the participation, or not participation, the capture rate is the best because, no big surprise, fall leaves, right? That's a pretty consistent expectation. Also, you're going to see the capture rates a little bit higher in the spring for similar reasons having to do with landscaping. The winter is traditionally the lowest capture rate period, and these are seasonal patterns that are very normal and very expected, having to do with essentially yard waste trends. I also want to point out here that we have Brooklyn 1 and 2 and 6 and 7 showing data from calendar year 2021 because they chose to opt into a special program that was an interim program between the old and the new program. Most of the other districts did not choose to do that opt-in. No district in Queens chose to do the opt-in. This can get confusing when looking at FY over FY capture rates. And overall, in my work, I've tried to balance the need to explain these little quirks and differences over time and in service availability by district, with also the need to keep things simple. I've gotten a lot of feedback from people asking me to simplify all of this, which as a social scientist, I kind of push back on, but it's sort of a balancing act. I also am sharing, and this was in the report that I sent out, my analysis of per household generation rates for both separated organics and trash. Now here, I want to point out, and this is crucial, that I did not use just 1 to 9 unit households in the denominator in the pre-2020 era. If I had done that, if we were looking on a per served household basis, the pre-2020 era would have shown an even higher per household rate. However, anticipating that that might be considered a bias or something like that, I did not do that. So what you're looking at is average pounds per household per month across all households for tonnages collected in the old program and the new program. And overall, you see that, some districts are setting out more tonnage than others. On average, BK6 is setting out 3.7 pounds per household per month, right? We're not talking about per week, we're talking about per month. And on the other side, we have the average pounds per household per month of refuse. That is again normalized by the same denominator. And you see that that is ranging from, from the 40s up to over 60 pounds. Are these taking into account a lot of other factors that potentially should also be included in this analysis? Possibly, yes. This is not reflecting containerized refuse collections, for example. It is it's using American Community Survey, which is part of census data, that is from year 2021. I just use that consistently throughout. In reality, there are variations in numbers of households every year, and there are variations in occupancy rates per household. So there are a lot of tweaks that definitely could be done to this analysis to make it more accurate. But overall, what you see is a disparity that is just paralleling the capture rate. You got a lot of stuff going in the trash and not much going in the organic bin. So this is what the graph for Brooklyn looks like over time. One thing to note here in the gray boxes is the number of districts that were served. So I would like to point this out. In 2018, Brooklyn had a record, right? A record of 9,907 tons of residential curbside organics, a capture rate of 5.5%, and that year, 10 districts in Brooklyn were served. If we go to 2024, we see that that was close to the same amount, but with 18 districts served. So you have a lower capture rate. And I point this out to warn against the use of tonnages alone, especially when you're talking only about organics tonnages in the absence of talking about refuse tonnages. If you talk about these tonnages, much less if you multiply them by 2,000 to talk about pounds, it can start to sound like vast amounts of material. But if you don't use a capture rate, you're not going to understand how that material compares to all of the potential material. And that's what I mean when I say the capture rate is a natural bullshit detector. If we look at BK6, this is what it looks like here. Here we have only one district served, so the comparisons are better, right? In some cases, because the program is being introduced or reintroduced, we don't have 12 months of service. And again, when you're looking at total tonnages, it's not going to always reflect that fact. So you may have 1 year where you have 9 months of service, and then the next year you have 12 months. The increase in tonnage is partly due to the additional months, and that needs to be remembered as well. When you calculate the capture rate, all that's taken care of because the capture rate is an average monthly capture rate over the year. And if there was no service in a district in a certain month, I don't include it in the rate. And that's another really important thing to point out here. So these rates are only reflecting performance in months where a district had collection service for organics. If I had just calculated it on the base of annual refuse tonnages versus organics tonnages, these capture rates would have been lower, especially in months like in the 9-month area. I'm sorry, the 9-month period. And definitely would have been lower. The capture rates would have been lower overall for these captures, these figures. On the other end of the scale, not to pick on anybody, but we have, even though they've been in the program for a long time, we have really low performance in some districts. And it's not just Brooklyn 1, it's also seen in Queens. It roughly corresponds to density, but there's more to it than that I think that we need to actually look into with some care. And we have performers that are anywhere in between. So I will just quickly go through these. In the information that I sent out, I calculated a capture rate for each district, and it shows the tonnages and the capture rates over time. And what I see when I look at this is decline. A decline that actually began before the cancellation of the last program. Will the rates next year be higher, right? So we're seeing some increases year upon year. Maybe, yes, they might. But they also can fall, right? They also can fall when a program is in place. So I'm just quickly going through these. You can look at them at your leisure, and they're all available in the info I've distributed. In the larger picture, what I want to emphasize is we have a decade of directly applicable program knowledge to draw from. What we saw prior to 2020, yes, we had the pandemic, and that was an immediate reason to cancel the program instantly, right? But even before that, the program was, I like to use the word doomed. When it was paused in 2018 by de Blasio, that was recognition that costs were high and tonnages were paltry. It will happen again if the capture rate doesn't go up. It will happen again, maybe in this administration and maybe the next administration. But one of the reasons why I've been emphasizing the capture rate so much is to maybe prevent this exact same thing from happening, prevent history from repeating itself. And contrary to a lot of the rhetoric that is going around, we are not starting from scratch. And the current approach is not a revolution, and it is not very different from the prior approach. So now I'd like to talk about some narratives. So I'm going to switch a bit from doing data analysis to looking at political rhetoric, and narratives are very much a part of that. And what I have observed through close review of city council testimony, content, and news coverage are some narratives that are repeated over and over again, and this is very normal in government, that may be taking on the status of accepted conventional wisdom, in part because this stuff is complicated. And I can tell you that when I try to get into the details with people outside of the waste world, and we're all in the waste world, their eyes glaze over. They do not want to hear nuance. But I want to share this with all of you because you can follow this, right? So let's start with simplicity. This is one of the big narratives. Make separation easy and people will do it. We get to a claim of over 211 million pounds of diversion, which I'll get to in a minute. But the important thing right now is that they're talking about success, and that the success is a testament to the value of simple universal programs. So there's a causal claim being made here that we're getting record-breaking tonnage, because the programs now are simple and universal, we finally have citywide programs that actually work and are thought. When asked about what kind of outreach might be planned for the continuation of the rollout, there's the suggestion that, you know what? This program's so simple that it does some of its own outreach, actually. Yeah, we have to do some outreach, but the real thing that's going to turn everything around is how much simpler this is. Set it out every week, use whatever bin you want, anything from your kitchen, anything from your garden, no sign up, no opt-in, no complicated rules, no special day, no limited hours. And you perhaps have heard this rhetoric, no drama, right? Perhaps you've heard it before, right? The problem is that the program really is not that much simpler now. Yes, there's one area and 1.5 areas where it's simpler. You don't have to use a sanitation issued brown bin anymore. You can use another type of bin as long as it's properly labeled, which is a great idea and is consistent with recycling. So that's more convenient, I'll grant you. You did need to quote unquote, opt in if you were a 10 plus unit building under the prior program. And that was more complicated too. I will also, clearly say that. On the other hand, you didn't need to opt in for the majority of the households served in the prior program. Those households were automatically put on a route. They didn't have to sign up to anything. And there were hundreds of thousands of those households. Other than that, the program is just not simpler, right? And I was talking to a reporter about this the other day, and I just kept trying to explain it in a more, nuanced way. What I would say is it's not simpler. It may be that history has been so quickly forgotten that the interim opt-in program is what they're referring to as being so complicated in the past, right? And there's sort of an amnesia about anything that went before. I'm also would point out that when I say simpler, this is simpler as as defined by Department of Sanitation. I don't think the program is simple. It's not simple logistically. It's not simple operationally in a building. And many people have no idea how to participate. But I'm talking here about the rhetorical claims, right? And if anyone has a different recollection of it, I have a very clear recollection of the de Blasio era program because I was working at sanitation. I was not at sanitation when the opt-in program came up, so this may not be entirely correct. But anyway, that's something I want to point out. Difficulty in the rhetoric may be some misremembering of the 10 plus unit enrollment process. And here is a picture of some of my colleagues at an enrollment training for building supers. And that, if you want to say that was complicated, it was complicated to reach a 10 plus unit building that way. Yes, it was. It was complicated. On the other hand, because we're seeing worse capture rates in denser areas, I can understand the thought process behind wanting to have that enrollment to begin with. And we have to ask ourselves, what is going to take the place of that enrollment that can reach hundreds of thousands of people and tens of thousands of superintendents in tens of thousands of buildings or more, right? So another narrative that is frequently brought up is the narrative around schools. So if you look just on the right here, this is the tonnage of organics that are collected on the school organics truck. School organics began back in 2013, and the tonnage increased over time as more schools were added. Um, in one of these years, I think there weren't any additional schools added. Again, it's a little hard for me to get that data. It's not public data. But then you have the hiatus and you see the school tonnage really increasing, right? So make no mistake about it. The tonnage on the school trucks is going up. It is breaking records to the point where it's nearly equal in both of these years to the residential curbside tonnage. And in the rhetoric, that this is always here to point to if the low capture rate for residential curbside is brought up, right? Well, maybe, yes, we have a ways to go with residential, but look at what we're doing with the schools, right? And it, without a doubt, it is great that all schools have organics collection, recycling collection. The idea that providing that collection is translating into training New Yorkers on the future of composting, et cetera, it does not necessarily follow. But another important thing to point out is that in the post-2021 era, this quantity also contains an unspecified amount of smart bins, which are coming from residential sources, which again is a great thing. But without statistics on how this breaks down, we can't really assess school performance. Furthermore, in the 2023 waste characterization study, we learned that the contamination rate for school organics is about 29%. The contamination rate for smart bin tonnage is undoubtedly very low, but we don't have any data on it, which means that potentially we have the mixture of very high quality organics that would be great for local composting with low quality organics that are coming from the school. Sanitation calculated some capture rates for school organics. They didn't calculate capture rates for residential organics in their waste characterization study, but they did for school organics, and the rates are high in comparison to residential capture. However, I can't really assess how they did that calculation because the open data on the sanitation provided open data link does give you school organics separately, but it doesn't give you school refuse separately. For whatever reason, they don't report that. And as I've explained before, I need those two tonnages in order to calculate the capture rate. What I will share, and this is one of the only data sets that is not public. This is something I foiled in 2020, right after I left sanitation. The data sets that you see up on open data are simplified. In reality, sanitation has a very, very complex and I will say extremely good database of all of its tonnages, and it gets into fine grained detail about the different material types and types of collection. And that was what I foiled. So with that data, which I have only from 05 to 19, I put together just to kind of put things in perspective for all of you about schools versus residential, the tonnages that we're talking about. So the gray is residential refuse. The light blue is residential paper, MGP, and organics combined. The black is school refuse, and the green line up top is again school MGP, paper, and organics combined. The graph that is on the left, the y-axis starts at 2 million pounds. If you want to see the school tonnage in relation to all of residential tonnage fully, look at the graph on the right. Now, what this means is that there is no way that school performance is going to make up for or divert substantial tonnages that are going to be measurable at the level of greenhouse gas reduction or for other purposes in comparison to residential tonnages. Residential tonnages are, to put it mildly, the vast majority of what sanitation has to collect. Residential tonnages are what are going to make or break the collection costs, because the collection costs and the truck routes for residential collection are far, far greater than they are for school collection. So if an agency such as the Department of Sanitation is talking about getting serious about diverting organics, they have to talk about residential tonnages, and they have to talk about school tonnages in context of their relatively small contribution to the overall waste stream. Now I'd like to turn to a related narrative that I call narratives of braggadocio. I first saw this with this piece of performance analysis that came out very early in the Queen's program. It is showing simple tonnages by month. It is comparing opt-in districts to not opt-in districts in terms of total tons. If you're comparing total tons across districts, it makes no sense because, no big surprise, different districts have different population sizes, so they're going to have different tonnages. If you're looking at month-over-month changes in a high fall season that is following not having collection for a long time, you're going to see almost artifacts of trends that get magnified here. The collection costs are shown in cost per district, which to my knowledge has never been done in any kind of cost analysis having to do with collection. It's always cost per ton, and there's no backup. This initial piece of publicity, which came out within months of reintroducing the full new program in Queens, alerted me to the fact that performance analysis was not being done in a way that is consistent with anyone who knows about waste statistics and works in the profession of waste management. Nonetheless, this kind of statement can make its way into reporting and become a kind of a pseudo fact. And the desire to actually look at what the data said and assess it came out of this initial piece of publicity. That led to me doing the Queen's performance analysis, which I did before this one. Then I then started to become concerned in early February 2024 to begin to hear about 211 million tons of diversion, pounds of diversion, which is 105,000 tons a year. I had been looking at the tonnages and I just didn't see anything like that much. People asked me, what is in that tonnage? And because I had worked at sanitation, I knew what might have gone into it. So this is another contribution that I'm making because I understand that if a person has not worked at sanitation and worked with the data, there is literally no way they're going to know this. However, what I did was but before I get to that, let me show you where this was reported. And it's been updated for FY24 in the Mayor's Management Report. And what you see here looks like a really positive, we're increasing year by year. We're going up year by year. This is great. This is record breaking. This is astounding, right? I have to say that when I took these numbers apart, I was quite dismayed that kind of rhetoric is accompanying the actual statistics that have been reported here. So the first thing to keep in mind is out of that 105,000 tons in FY23, the single biggest category of what's being reported as diverted as the result of programs that are simple, easy to use, and finally make sense is food rescue by local NGOs. What is sanitation's role in this? They administer the Donate NYC portal. They implement that because of city law, and they do work on it. There's no question about it, but they don't pick up that food. They don't drop off that food. They don't coordinate the deliveries. This is all done by the NGO sector. We also have another 25% or so that is private landscaper collections that are received at Freshkills. Again, a wonderful thing. Private landscapers are hard at work all over New York City, picking up commercial and residential land, grass clippings and things like that, and taking them to compost. But this is not a curbside collection activity by sanitation whatsoever. Do they own and run the Freshkills compost facility? They absolutely do. But as I mentioned before, to pay attention to the immense size of the residential stream and understand the requirements of collection that go into picking up the residential stream organics once a week, and to understand the disastrous effect of low capture rates in the past on collection efficiency, all points to the fact that it is creating confusion to lump in these very different types of tonnages that are not residential and have nothing to do with anything that goes on at the curb. Another example would be community composting, which I've got in mustard color. And then we have some other programs. We have Rikers, which is on-site. Christmas trees and seasonal leaf collections are curbside. So that's a little bit more fair, as are the school and organic smart bins. But overall, it is misleading to say that we are breaking records as New York City already with 105,000 tons in FY23, and we haven't even gotten started, right? We haven't even gotten out to the rest of the city. Now, you may be asking why I'm talking about FY23 here. The data on everything but the curbside is from open data and monthly tonnages, so that I could get for FY24. But the other stuff, this data, it goes into an annual report, and that has not been updated for FY23. So as soon as it's updated, I'm sorry, to FY24, as soon as it's updated, we can do a similar calculation to this. I have no doubt that it's going to show a similar kind of breakdown with a lot of the tonnage from food rescue, which again is a fantastic thing. So that's not really my point here. My point has to do with the future viability of the curbside residential program. Now, another kind of disturbing thing in this comparison was, so if you'll recall, it looked as if, so these are the numbers from the MMR. They start in,
let me just,
have to stop?
No, you don't have to stop. Well, I just want to have enough time for questions. So I want to just get a sense of
okay.
I know we're all fully enraptured.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll skip over this, but essentially, it's there is even counting the all of the categories, right? So that I attempted to count up all of the categories over the past years that were being counted up in FY23. And I found that the record, if you're looking at that as of FY23, was actually hit in FY19, but that's irrelevant because this is just mincing words. It's playing with records. There were also discrepancies in reporting, and I'll just quickly show you. This is the explanation they gave me. There was a problem with my analysis, and essentially what they said is the old curbside tonnages pre pre-20, or the old curbside tonnages pre-2022 were reported with the recycling tonnages elsewhere in the mayor's management report. That doesn't even fully explain the discrepancies, but they were not willing to say anything more after that when I followed up with them. So, I'm going to really go out here on a limb to say that what I see here is a rhetorical policy of braggadocio, which is a pseudo-Italian word, right? It's actually from an English poet in 1594, but it means what it means. And I just don't think that we as a city can afford to make policy based on braggadocio. If we ever could, one might have argued in the past that we should give the program a chance. Let, don't rain on the parade so early into it. But we have a past. We have a past history. And anyone who says that it is not comparable to what's going on today doesn't know that history or doesn't want to know it. So last thing, I calculated the capture rates for Seattle. Now, the bad news is that for multifamily housing, the capture rates for Seattle are much, much lower for organics than they are for single family housing. They're around 18%, and they're down from a height of 26% back in 2016. So that information is available. I'll just close to say, I completely support and for the community composters and everything that they stand for in all of its complexity. My next steps have to do a lot with just this very dull topic of data transparency and accountability. I do believe that we need to test different strategies, and there are methodologies that can do that. We need to directly face the issue of 10 plus unit buildings, dropping a bin in front of one of those buildings and saying compost is just not going to be enough, right? And then lastly, we need, and this is in keeping with the work of Borough President Reynoso's office, who I respect so much, we need land, right? We need land for small and mid-scale composting sites and what goes along with them. So I will stop here.
Oh my gosh, that was really great. So much
Thank
to
you.
unpack. Thank you so much for all of that. And thank you for your work around transparency. It's always so important. So why don't we just dive into some questions from the chat? Sorry, we're finding the questions. Let's see. Lee says, I'm curious about any historic precedent that could predict the impact of fines on the capture rate.
Oh, okay. I'm going to have to share the screen again
Okay.
for that one. And I'll try to do that quickly. So another analysis that I've done, I haven't gotten that far really because I am not skilled in super multivariate statistics. I'm skilled in basic statistics, but this research question would take a very, very complex statistical analysis, which I can get into. But what I did simply is I plotted the diversion rate. So this is not the capture rate, it's the diversion rate for recycling against the number of tickets issued per year recycling violations.
Mm-hmm.
So all we're looking at is a visual sort of correlation. But what we see is, so curbside recycling really gets going in 93, and there's a rapid rollout along the lines of what happened with organics, but not patchwork, not start and stop. It just rolls out. And by 1995, it's throughout the whole city. And the diversion rate then hits 12.5% on an extremely rough extremely rough basis, I would say that equates to like a roughly 20% capture rate. Okay. I don't quote me on that, but it's certainly not a single digit capture rate. It maybe increases a little bit and then boom, it goes up. Why does it go up? It doesn't go up because people started to understand and care and get used to it. It goes up because new heavy materials were added to the curbside program is why it goes up. And that was phased in borough by borough. And by 2000, we have a diversion rate of 17%, which is roughly close to a 40% capture rate. And then we have the famous, many of you remember the cuts to curbside recycling, leaving only paper collections and metal collections, and the restoration of those cuts, where you have the diversion rate rebounds, boom, right back to where it was before, and sort of is the same over time and then starts to go down. And then there are more materials added. This is when the so-called 3 through 7s were added, which didn't add a lot of weight like the earlier ones, which was bulk metal and mixed paper. And you see the diversion rate going up and up, and it hits a high point. And by the way, I'm calculating the curbside only diversion rate here, which I can get into why that's a little different than the overall. But not only do we not see this story of like, oh, it was slow improvement as people understood. No, that's not what happened. Number two, we see that the growth periods of diversion do not mirror the numbers of tickets. We see the most heavy ticketing time. We see, if anything, a slight decline in the diversion rate. So with regard to I'm trying to stop sharing here. Hold on a second. Sorry, folks. With regard to enforcement, I would say that it is very unwise to expect any kind of major turnaround because of enforcement. If only on that basis. Plus, you have the fact that enforcing recycling is 100 times easier than enforcing source separated organics for reasons that you guys can easily think about. So
Okay.
yes, I would allow that there's a fundamental difference between putrescible waste and recyclables. I didn't see the full comment here, but yeah. And that's again, I don't need to tell you guys this. Putrescible waste, municipal solid waste, is regulated because of its organic content. That's what makes it putrescible. That's the same thing as organics. That is very, very different from source separated recycling.
Right. Okay. Just going down the chat some more. There's a bunch of stuff in the chat. Yeah. Okay. Okay, Jackie, why don't we start with you with a quick question? And remembering that there's other questions. Thank you. Do you want to just read your questions, or your hand is up? Muted also.
Jackie, you're on mute.
You're still muted, Jackie.
So sorry. Thank you. So this might not be relevant right now. It's something that's on my mind, and it is something that I think should be underscored with the SWAB. And that is, can you explain the differences between avoidable and unavoidable food waste, and why this isn't broken down in the waste characterization study or this data, and what the implications of that could be?
Okay. So another thing, I had a slide about this because I thought this might come up, but let me just say a couple of things. One is the work I do, the way that I work, I focus extremely closely on data, history, comparative policy in a particular area. And I am focused on curbside organics, which means that I am setting aside food waste prevention. That does not mean that I don't think food waste prevention is incredibly important. It is. But I think that we need to talk about curbside collection, which is in the here and now, separately from food waste prevention. That said, the waste characterization does break it down into at least, it has many, many subcategories, and these are up on open data, that breaks down food that it breaks down food. I don't have it in front of me, but it breaks down food into a lot, like packaged food that's in intact packaging or opened packaging or unpackaged. And there are other distinctions with the food, that would allow you to do that kind of analysis if you wanted to. If you wanted to analyze how much of the 300,000 tons from Brooklyn, you would classify based on those waste characterization subcategories as preventable, you can do it. And I can tell you how to do it if you want. And this is another thing that I want everyone to know. To say one more time, because I have, frankly, I've heard some gossip and things like that. I have no inside track, right? The only inside track that I have has to do with the fact that I know how to calculate these statistics, and I know about the existence of data at sanitation. And one of the things that I have done since retiring is the lengthy process of trying to get data sets up on open data. One of them that is up now, and we don't have time to talk about it, will tell you exactly where your trash is going. Okay, so that's a big, big gain in a public data set. Another one has to do with biosolids and where they're going.
Mm.
And also the waste characterization data was not going to be put up on open data. The department hoped not to do it, and I fought them on that too. But what I want to do is help others use the data and do their own analyses. You shouldn't be relying on me to do an analysis. I mean, I'm glad to share it, but this is public. This is all totally public. I can tell you how things are calculated, but you do not need me to do this. And Jackie, I hope you understand the spirit
Yep.
of
Thank
which
you.
I say
Yep.
that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to another question, just so we can get more people answering question. Yeah, we've got something. So Greg asks, would you allow there's a fundamental difference between putrescible waste and recyclables that don't rot and smell? If so, how might this affect collection and impact local versus distant processing?
Well, I don't know if it affects collection. It affects participation. It affects how the building management deals with the materials in the building. It doesn't directly affect collection because they're using the identical methods of, or at least were until very recently, of bags going into manual rear loaders. That's changing, and I have not factored that into this discussion. Again, because I'm not talking about all things at once. I'm talking only about this. As far as processing, organics typically do not go far to be processed. Um, they're not globally traded. They're not even going, they're maybe going over to another nearby state. And the reasons for that are mainly economic and having to do with weight. There are very big regulatory differences. Obviously, to collect organics and to collect trash is the sort of two sides of the same coin from a regulatory perspective. And that means that micro haulers have to go through the same kind of refuse collection, licensing procedures. Sites that manage organic waste have to follow state permits that are much more stringent. than for recyclables. So yeah, that's all very true.
Okay, thank you. Allison asks, if DSNY is not going to up their outreach education efforts, is there another city agency that can step up the DOH portal? Are there other cities that have a better model of cross-departmental collaboration and promotion of?
It's a great question. I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
I think that this could be, a collective endeavor to find out.
Yeah.
The way I view the situation right now with, decades of experience that we've had and almost no progress in terms of tonnage is that I don't know what to do. I just know that we need to talk about stuff honestly.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
about all I know right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that proceeding, it was Albert Einstein who said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome.
Yeah.
That's what's going on right now.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we can leap to solutions. I know that there are people that are worried about me making these observations about the capture rate because it may discourage
Uh-huh.
people or that, you know, give it a chance, that we are well beyond that.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, it, in my view, at the very least, we need an agency that is honest about performance and that is learning from performance, right?
Mm.
I'm hardly a business person, but it's, business 101 that you look at key performance indicators. And if they're not giving you what you're expecting, you go in, you try to find out why, and you try to do things differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even if you're, a lean and mean, run a city agency like a business type of person, this should be the first thing that you do. And instead, what we have is braggadocio.
Yeah. Right. So let me give Pablo a chance. Somebody in the room.
Yes, your codes, your strata codes, are those yours or are they used citywide for low density, high income housing, etc.?
I'm sorry, could you say that again? I didn't quite catch all that.
Oh, your strata codes, are
Yes,
those yours or are they used
no.
citywide?
I use the ones that they used in the waste characterization study. Now you could critique those strata codes also if you wanted to. That would be another whole big analysis. But because I was using their waste characterization data, I used their strata codes. Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe let's just ask one more question. I'm sorry, there's so many questions, and I just want to.
I can stay on, but I know that you guys probably need to wrap up your meeting.
I know. Well, we could stay on all day if it were just remote, but we have people who want to go home at Brooklyn Borough
Yeah.
Hall.
So, Sharon, could
Yeah.
we ask her for contact information?
Oh yeah. So would you be open to receiving questions via email? Is that what someone asked?
Honestly, right now, I am prepping for a major conference that maybe you've heard of that I'm putting on at Baruch College on October 29th and 30th on organic waste policy, and I'm very, very busy. So getting individual questions, people often want me to, get involved in lengthy dialogues with them.
Yeah.
I just don't have the bandwidth for that.
Okay.
Um,
How
Samantha, could you drop the link in the chat for the conference in case folks want to
oh, yeah.
attend?
Thank
I
you.
will say that we are almost at capacity now. People may not show, but we have a fire department capacity that we have to observe. And I wanted this conference to be free. I'm just getting the link here.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be free. So a lot of people have enrolled. It is not going to be videoed in any way. Why? Because I basically am putting together this whole conference on my own with only minimal help, and I just couldn't handle that.
Uh,
That is the reason behind that. I want,
Well, okay,
yeah.
thank you for that. I also wanted to ask if we consolidated the questions and then sent them to you from like a neutral email address that wouldn't engage you in lots of back and forth and give you as much time as you need to answer them, would that be a possibility?
What
Um,
I know, what I
no.
would like to do maybe is come back and you all have the questions and we can, it's
Yes.
much easier for
Oh my
me to
God.
talk about it
Yes,
than
we
to
would
have to
love
write it.
to come back.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. Okay, so after,
Yeah.
obviously after your conference.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm sorry. I think we need to go on because it's 8 now, and I think. Sorry, Sharon. We're going to have to move along. But thank you so much for
Okay.
everything that you
Thank you.
have done, and we will be watching for all of your reports and everything. We always are gobbling up anything you ever publish. So
Well,
thank you.
thank you. And I see, just to say, I see a lot of questions about
I know.
rats, about density, about National Grid, right? I want you guys to know, and this was also in my final PowerPoint, when people work in agencies, 99% of the people have no control whatsoever or even full knowledge of policy and politics.
Yes.
It may seem to you like they should from their title. They don't. And this is true of every agency. It's extremely siloed. And so when people ask me questions, right, I I don't have the answer to all of these things. I just want to point that out. How am I, I well, I am an academic and I go by data. So just be aware, okay? Be aware that I can't necessarily answer every question. So I will let you guys go, or I will leave. So
Yeah.
have a great
You're
day.
welcome to
you.
stay for our
Thank you
boring
so
rest of the
much.
email. Thank you so
Okay.
much for
Thank
everything.
All right.
Thanks a lot for all the time you gave us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Already left.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for all of your great questions. And sorry we couldn't get to all of them. That was a treasure trove and a dense one at that. So should we move on to Lacey's?
I will go super
Yeah,
quick.
yeah.
Please at least capture the ones we had based on that and then send them to her in advance of her coming back.
Yes,
to
that's a
talk
great
again,
idea. Yeah.
So that we don't lose all of those because it looks like there were a number of really
Yeah.
good ones in there.
And did you guys hear that? So Sherry suggested, it's a great suggestion. We'll capture all the questions from the chat. So if you didn't get to ask your question, Sharon, maybe you just want to put it in the chat. We'll
I'm
capture
already doing it.
and we'll give them to her in the in advance for next time. Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
So
super
Lacey.
super
Yeah.
quickly. Hi everyone. I wanted her to share that link because I just wanted to give a very brief update that the report, we're putting the finishing touches on the report that you heard about last time, that Ezra presented. I wanted to give a super big shout out to Lee for design that looks amazing. I can't wait for you all to see it. And we were asked to present it at that conference on the Wednesday afternoon. So it will be out before that. So really looking forward to sharing that with everyone. And then the other thing is that same day on the 30th, I just wanted to call everyone's attention to a hearing that the Council Sanitation Committee is having. It's oversight on containerization, but there are a lot of bills also being heard specifically about organics. Maybe the legislative committee is going to talk about that. So I won't give a ton of details, but just wanted to put it on everyone's radar, and that is it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, let's all be like Lacey with our updates for the next bit. Okay, coalition update, Save Our Compost.
Save Our Compost is can be a quick one because there's still a lot of background work going on. But the big thing is, which is now in the agenda, the Compost Carnival is in full planning and happening on Sunday, October 20th from 2 to 5 p.m. in Manhattan. And I will say, because we were going on about this, so it is at the Battery Park City Esplanade Plaza is what it's called. If you just look at the Esplanade, you'll be along the waterfront. And this is along the waterfront, but it's on the south side of the marina that's behind the financial center. So that's where it's going to be. There's a volleyball court there now. There didn't used to be when I lived there, but there's a volleyball court there now. And it'll be like right in that space there, right on the corner on the south side of the marina. So there's a lot of planning going on. You'll start to see more emails about it. I won't take up more time unless I'm missing anything. I know Allison's on the planning committee, so I give her
What's the subway stop for it?
It'll be by the World Trade Center, so like E23R. 4-5 would be over there.
It's in the thing.
Ooh,
All of
you
that's
even
in the.
gave more info than I sent you.
Well,
Look at
but
that.
I went to Gil's email.
Oh,
Yes.
nice.
Oh,
Nice.
right.
Yeah.
So yes,
Okay, great. Thank you.
that's the main thing.
Reusable NYC.
I attended the meeting this month. They're still she's found someone to pick up Choose to Reuse. I think they were working with Keith's office, but it's still not moving forward yet. So they're thinking of looking for a different person. They wanted to let everyone know they'd appreciate if people would call their council members to ask them to support Intro 900, which is about drinking fountains in the public spaces. So 500 new ones by 2030. We also discussed Intro 695, which is the plastic study bill, and Intro 0035, which is a prohibition on dishwasher pods and sheets. So maybe that'll be something that they look into.
Okay.
That's all.
Thank you. Okay, now committee reports. Executive committee, can we approve the September meeting minutes? Do we have enough people?
I can agree with quorum.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, we have
Okay.
a quorum.
All right, so we have a quorum. So does anybody want to move to approve the wonderful meeting minutes that Mary Ellen?
I move to approve.
Thank you.
I second.
Mark. Sherry seconds. Is that all in favor? I guess we would just say anybody. Okay, anybody opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, great.
We've got staff.
We've got some hands that are still up, but I'm
That's
sure
from
that you're not
before,
voting.
yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Legislative committee.
Yeah, so we wrote testimony for the sanitation committee hearing that was last month, and that covered a couple of different bills that were in interest, mostly study bills, one about textiles, one about recycling, the bigger batteries, one about studying minimizing single-use plastic, and then another one was about continuing the waste characterization study. So as we all know, that 2023 was the last one covered under the legislation that was previously passed. And then next month on October 30th, there will be another sanitation meeting. And as Lacey mentioned, it's going to have a bevy of bills introed about organic waste. So we're going to do two meetings again this month. One is to kind of discuss talking points and identify people to write testimony, and then another meeting where we talk through the testimony and pass it so that it can go to the various SWABs for approval. But yeah, that's the short and sweet update.
Thank you so much, and thanks for all that planning in advance for next testimony. That's.
Oh yeah, no problem. And I'll send out an email with the dates of. Oh, sorry.
What?
Did I cut you off?
No, not at all.
Okay, I'll send an email out with the dates of the two meetings. Because it'll have to move from our normal meeting schedule. So that'll go up
Okay,
soon.
great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And outreach committee.
Sure, I can give a quick update on that. We're meeting tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. We'll be going over the updates of what our little subcommittees have been working on. And one bigger thing we did last month, thanks to other folks on the team that were pushing to get it through, get it all together and sent out, was the community board outreach with suggestions on statement of needs, things to add into the statement of needs. So we were able to do that. But yeah, so tomorrow night, 6:30 will be the meeting. If you want to join, please send me an email. Can you put my email in? Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Events committee? Is Liz still on? Okay.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm still here. There is no update on the events committee except that I'll be tabling at the compost carnival. And anybody is welcome to join me. So yeah, I'll be touching base with Allison to see how we can what we need to do for tabling and then anything in addition to that.
Thank you. Thank you for tabling. Thank you for your service. I also saw that Allison put a volunteer link if someone else wants to join for the Compost Carnival event to help out. And now we're on to NYCHA committee.
The next meeting of the NYCHA committee is October 10th at 5:30 on Zoom. And they're continuing to do outreach to the residents of the NYCHA campuses and partnering with several other environmental groups that work in the NYCHA campuses. So I'll report to them about the compost carnival because that might be something that they'd be interested in.
Oh, great. Thank you, Susan. Okay. So next, just moving forward, we're making up for time. Thanks,
Yeah, we're doing
everybody.
great.
Thanks for setting the pace, Lacey. Okay, everyone's invited to enjoy. Do you want to say about the Earth Matter?
Sure. So Earth Matter celebrating their 15-year anniversary at Governor's Island on the 10th. So that's Thursday from 5 to 8. They're also doing a reuse pop-up. So if anybody has anything that they believe needs a new home, they can bring it with them. Tickets are still on sale. You can also just go and arrive and you can buy a ticket at the door. So hope to see you all there.
Excellent.
You said door? Is it indoors?
No, well, actually it is. It's at the arts building right outside the ferry.
Okay, thank you. Also, I'm just going to run down these, and then Jackie has something to say, and somebody else might have another announcement from the floor. But just that Cafeteria Culture is putting out some kick-ass data in a report that it's just coming out from our EPA 2-year grant, and there's going to be a reception that Fund for the City of New York, our fiscal sponsor, is hosting for us. And so I sent an email around earlier that people are invited. Anyone from the SWAB is invited to attend. You just have to sign up, and we'd love to have you join in the evening. It's fun. Okay. Also, then we've already said about Save Our Compost. Jackie. Oh yeah. What do you want to? Oh yeah. Do you want to add Claire? Can Jackie do her thing first, and then Claire? Okay. Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead, Jackie. Thanks for waiting.
Thank you very, very much, Rhonda, and everybody. It's 8:12. I realize it's late. I'm seeing questions in the chat about how can we save our compost program, and Ms. McBride said that she really wasn't a business person, so she couldn't really make recommendations about how to really increase those rates. But there are a lot of people in the city who, and she even said a little bit in her report, that a lot of the reasons why we're seeing low capture is because we're not doing the outreach to the residents. Many of you remember years ago the dueling blue and green bin advertising program. It was in the subways, on the buses, and what have you. We don't see any ads. So what we really need is to get building by building and help the buildings figure out how to increase participation and engage their residents in all of this. Some of you may be familiar with this guide. It is free. It's a free download from the SWAB website. You just go to the links and under recycling guides, and I've updated it for mandatory recycling, and it's got all kinds of tips and suggestions and examples of from successful buildings that are engaging their residents. And this is a free guide that everybody should really know about. Every building in the city should have a copy of this to get suggestions on how to engage their residents. No amount of tenant flyers and the decals that you can download from Department of Sanitation replaces the fact that there are things you can do in your building to get people genuinely excited about this.
Thank you so
Over.
much.
Thank you. Thank you for the
Thank
time.
That was excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for staying on that for all these years.
Oh, thank you.
Also, oh yeah. So Beth, do you want to say? I forgot to put this in the.
Sure. Adding, I know Kendall had sent an email about including the event link as well, but Claire Mifflin wanted to share an upcoming event next Wednesday, October 16th, from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Center for Architecture or on Zoom. It's called Designing Waste Containerization into Streetscapes. It is $5 on Zoom or $10 in person and free for AIA New York or ASLA members or students. I don't know if anyone who's on Zoom right now, maybe Kendall can drop a link in the chat. It's a little hard for me to do that from Borough Hall. But Claire shares that we will discuss our report on waste containerization with panelists from building management, urban design, public space advocates, and affordable housing development. They invited DSNY to be on the panel also, but they declined. Claire says, we argue that DSNY's approach misses valuable opportunities to keep sidewalks clear, make better use of curb space, improve labor for building staff and waste haulers, and consider and incentivize waste reduction. And they'll be sharing the 35-page report in advance. And there's also a press release. We can send this out to the SWAB list as well. Although, as I mentioned, I think Kendall already sent out something about the event, but that's that announcement.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot. Is that everything? Did we get everything?
Amazing. Shocked.
Wow. Okay.
Oh wait, Uli has something.
Oh yeah, Uli, do you have?
Oh, I have a question. I think last month we were talking about the ballot initiative, and I think Lacey was making
But you know what? Brad Lander wrote an email about this.
Did he?
Yes, he did. I went to share it with everybody, but.
So we should give one step of background on it, and now I don't remember. I remember talking about it, I don't remember all the details. So as you're giving the response.
Okay.
Give a little background.
It's
on the ballot in November, amongst other things.
Yeah. Maybe it was on social media. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's under the guise of a ballot proposal called Clean Streets, but within that there is a piece about giving the authority to DSNY to enact containerization.
Right. Oh. All right, we're going to find out about it.
I can find it.
Okay, wait.
So I definitely read it. I'm just more curious as to like why if anyone knows why they felt the need to put that in there, and that kind of.
Hi, I've asked about it, and I'm told that I'm going to be getting more information, but I know that the Progressive Caucus is saying to vote no. I don't know the details, so I can't, make any recommendations. But I've been asking. I need more information from my groups.
Right.
at the community board too, Crystal Hudson said that she recommended voting no on everything except number one,
What's number one? Do you know?
the equal rights for women and reproductive.
That's a state, yeah, I agree. That's a state proposal. And then these other four things are ballot that has, I think the bottom line, and please don't quote me, is that it gives the mayor's office more control, like outside of like city council policy and legislation. So do we want to consolidate more power in what the mayor's office wants? So,
Yeah.
I mean, I can read you what it says on the NYC votes page. The BP hasn't taken a position, so I'm not going to editorialize. I'm just going to tell you what it says.
Okay.
The proposal would amend the city charter to expand and clarify the Department of Sanitation's power to clean streets and other city property and require disposal of waste in containers. Voting yes will expand and clarify the Department of Sanitation's power to clean streets and other city well, okay, they just repeated it twice.
Yeah.
Voting no leaves laws unchanged.
We discussed that. That was about public spaces. If they have jurisdiction to go into pseudo-public places.
Yeah, it's three things. That's one of them. Containerization is one of them.
Right.
Yeah, that's all it says.
And didn't you say last month that it was something like if the city council has a ballot initiative, but then the mayor does and his supersede theirs, and sometimes they put forth ballot initiatives to try to just supersede the
Brad
city.
Lander on Twitter,
Yeah.
X, said no, vote no on ballot proposals 2 through 6 that came from Mayor Adams' hastily slapped together charter revision commission that clearly prioritized politics over substance. The proposals do little to fix management of the city, distract from real solutions, and make a mockery of the purpose of democratic input from the people.
Wow.
Yeah, but will Brad Launder's position change if he becomes mayor?
Yes, of course it will.
Maybe.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll see. Oh yeah, Debbie, do you have a question? Or does your cat have a question?
I'm sorry. Yes, my cat had a question.
I want
to. So I just wanted to say, yes, I agree about the ballot initiatives that, I've read in multiple places. We should vote no on 2 through 6. And I agree with what Betty said about the mayoral control. And I also wanted to say something about, which I might have said before, coming from a building in Brooklyn that's been very successful with composting for years, because we've been participating since the initial 2014 or whenever that was. I think it's staffing in the building. And I think that we're kidding ourselves. Like I've been doing a lot of door knocking for candidates over years here in Brooklyn. So I've been in and out of so many neighborhoods where there are large buildings with no staff, 0 staff. And, huge problems with collecting trash and recyclables to begin with. So, expecting buildings to step up where there's no infrastructure, supers, porters, people to actually, manage a big building's amount of compost. I mean, that's where the money needs to come. The money needs to come to the buildings to give the support, not just education, but support. Support for these programs.
That's a great point.
I just don't see how it's going to work any other way. You can speak up and down and up and down and up and down to the buildings in Sunset Park and the buildings, in all kinds of neighborhoods where there's just 0 supers, that live in the building and porters that are employed by the buildings. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. It's interesting. Thank you. Thanks for that. That's really important.
I found something else that might be helpful. This is from City and State. So they're going through each one of them and saying, what is the proposal? What would it actually change? And how angry is the city council? But I'm just going to read the what would this actually change part. While the Department of Sanitation currently has the authority to clean some city-owned property, the current charter has a few gaps, meaning that the department is not expressly charged with the cleaning of center medians or perimeters of city-owned property, for example, according to the commission's report. This proposal would close those gaps. The proposal would also formally extend the department's authority to enforce street vending to not just streets and sidewalks, but other areas like parks, where the NYPD and parks enforcement officers also have authority to issue street vending summonses. Finally, as the city makes a push for trash bins, the proposal would clarify in the charter that the Department of Sanitation has the authority to enforce that push.
Thank you. That's clear.
Why does everybody want so much control over vendors?
I know. Street vendors. They're organized, though.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Does anybody have anything else to bring up? Thanks for bringing up the charter again. Who brought that up? Thank you, Uli. You're heading up the right committee. Oh, we have a new message at the front. Oh yeah, and yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
You just
You muted yourself.
man.
You're still muted. Yeah.
oh, okay, yeah, when they first dropped, am I muted?
No.
They dropped off a brown bin, I guess it was a year ago, or I don't know what. And the porter didn't know anything about it. And the next day I looked and there were books in it, and then it disappeared. So, and I don't think the landlady gives anything about it. She manages like 10 buildings. So I don't know what, I guess I'm rambling a little bit, but the fact that we do have some people here, but they're totally ignorant about anything like this. So how do I reach them? And is it me only?
Right.
So,
And why is it on the backs of volunteers?
yeah.
Right.
There's one person who bought a brown bin by herself, and it's for a building of about 80 units. There's like hardly anything in it. She puts it out Wednesday night, and it's really bad. So anyway.
I want to just say about the school collection rate, the school collection that Samantha McBride was talking about. The contamination rate is abysmal, like as you would imagine.
I was shocked that it was only, what did she say, 24% or something?
29.
Yeah.
29%. I was shocked it was that low because
I don't buy. Well, because maybe they do reject it if it's higher than that.
I don't know.
Maybe that's because I heard that there was a threshold that they would reject, but I don't know. I don't know how they're listing.
I guess it's maybe based on weight and not volume. That's,
Good point.
Yeah. I
because
mean, 'cause it's
volume
heavy.
wise, it looks like it's like, if you look at it, it looks like it's 80% contaminated.
Oh,
I mean, when
no.
I look at what's
Right,
in
and
it.
if it's based on weight, the stuff that contaminates it is like straws and wrappers
Milk
and
cartons.
yeah, very light.
Anyway, Uli
Anyway.
has another thing.
Oh yeah, Uli.
Oh, I just said, I mean, along the same line, I was just wondering, Rhonda, if you could say something about how they are educating kids about composting, because I found with kids that I know, they don't really know much about it at home, so I'm not sure like what they're teaching them at school that's supposed to change the next generation.
Well, I mean, it's like it's all done not in the classroom unless there's a program that's doing it in the classroom.
Not in the curriculum.
Yeah, it's not in the curriculum. Exactly. I mean, you could probably speak to it more than I can because you've looked more closely at the curriculum.
Well, I do notice a difference with the kids coming up. They're finally the ones who've been educated with composting.
Right.
They are more aware of whether they want to do it or not is something else. But they do.
But I mean, you are also had a very special school.
Yeah, at the
like-
Harvard School we separate,
Yeah.
but we also have the cooperation of the
Yeah.
the kitchen staff. I mean, what you have to have the porters, the superintendent. They all have to be on board with that.
Mhm.
Not only that, our whole island is supposed to be zero waste.
Right.
So we've got their support. So
Yeah.
our school is not a
Hey,
typical.
Pablo,
Yes,
can you
Yeah.
guys hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
It's Jackie. The reason why I asked that question to Samantha about avoidable versus unavoidable food waste is because a very high percentage of what we could be of what we're throwing out, based on some research that I saw presented at the ReFed conference in June, reflects totally edible food, like leftovers and that kind of food that is thrown away because of misconceptions about date labels. And when she was showing us those numbers on school, I started to get like really freaked out, thinking that a very high percentage of what's being thrown out in the school is perfectly edible food. And are we, through this program, teaching our children to throw away good food?
Can I tell you the data that we collected
Yeah.
from our program? We made a program called Mindful Choice Meals where we used the USDA's offer versus serve rules, and we had students. We took a number of different measures because we determined that 46% of the food waste is untouched. So we focused on untouched food waste, and we reduced overall food waste. Overall food waste was reduced by 50%, but untouched food waste was reduced by 64%. But in the program, with the measures that we took, food consumption increased by 46%. So it wasn't a matter of austerity or scarcity, it was a matter of agency and giving students the knowledge about their food choices and about what they're supposed to be, what the rules are and what their choices are. There's a large amount of food that's being pre-plated and overplated by the serving staff in misconception of trying to fulfill the offer versus serve rules and making sure they don't get penalized for not serving a reimbursable meal, which is a complete meal.
Right. And isn't it true that shared tables are not allowed in schools, Rhonda?
No, they're now allowed because in 2021, the city council passed a food waste thing for all city agencies.
Yes, yes.
And that you have to come up with that. So there's even food donation is now allowed via the proper channels. But it takes, it's on the backs of volunteers. So it takes somebody from the school who's like, I'll find some place to donate this to. And then you have to get a receipt for it and all that stuff. But share tables and food donation are both allowed. But we're trying to prevent waste at the source so that they can see.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to add one other point about what happens in some of the cafeterias.
We have to go.
Okay. I know.
Which is that if
Breathing
a child has home lunch, and let's say they bring a banana from home, they're not allowed to put the banana peel in the school compostable. They tell the children it's only for school lunch.
That's not necessarily true. It depends on the school.
I've never been to a school where that was the case.
Well, some of the schools, that's what the kids tell me, that they have to bring home their own waste.
That's crazy.
We
I
have to
can't
go now
imagine.
so we can send our staff home. Thank you,
Good night.
everyone, and good night.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Betty.
Good night, everybody.
Thank
Nice
you.
to be here tonight. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks a lot,
Bye-bye.
How would this know if a piece of fruit came from their home or not?
No, they don't know.
Yeah. Anyway.